Duane Ollinger mystery at Blind Frog Ranch. The desert air settled like a thick veil over Blind Frog Ranch, quiet and unmoving under the baking Utah sun. The mesa loomed in the distance like a jagged scar in the earth, its crimson rock etched by time and mystery. Below, tucked into a forgotten pocket of wilderness, Duane Ollinger's compound stood in uneasy silence. Recent events had rattled the crew. Shadowy figures seen beyond the trail cameras, nocturnal movements through the brush, and signs of human activity in restricted territory. Duane stood near the ATV, arms crossed, scanning the horizon through a pair of dusty binoculars. A chill twisted through his spine despite the heat. Something wasn't right. The equipment failures, the motion-triggered alarms tripping in sequence, it all pointed to sabotage. But not the kind the ranch had grown used to, not ancient curses or buried secrets. This felt human, calculated. Dangerous further into the valley, where the canyons choked the sky and the terrain grew jagged, evidence had surfaced. Broken branches, tire tracks in soft soil, remnants of cheap camp gear. Duane knew the terrain like the back of his weathered hand. These weren't tourists. They weren't locals either. They were poachers, or worse, mercenary prospectors, eager to strip the land of its rumored treasures, both natural and supernatural. For days, Duane and the crew had tracked the signs like bloodhounds. With each clue, the picture sharpened. An illegal camp set deep in the no-go zone near the cavern system. Whoever they weren't afraid of the myths, or the law. And they'd gotten bold. Too bold. Duane wasn't about to let Blind Frog Ranch become a war zone. He loaded the ATV with essentials, drone gear, field rations, infrared goggles, and a modified shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds. This wasn't about violence. It was about sending a message. The desert had its own rules, and so did the ranch. The journey into the Badlands took hours. The trails narrowed into footpaths, the engine echoing through steep-walled canyons. Dust clouded behind him like a phantom trail. The GPS coordinates sensed from the last drone flavor were drawing closer. Heat signatures, tents, and the faint flicker of a campfire, hidden beneath a natural rock outcrop. Duane parked the ATV under cover and continued on foot, moving silently through the brush. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting jagged shadows that grew like claws across the land. He crouched behind a mesquite bush, pulling out thermal binoculars. 3 figures. One pacing near the fire, another working on a makeshift antenna, the third sitting with a scoped rifle resting across their knees. This wasn't a hunting party. This was a tech-savvy team, equipped with surveillance gear and tactical support. They weren't just camping. They were listening, watching, probably scanning the mine shafts, the old vaults, even the strange electromagnetic anomalies in the valley. Duane's jaw tightened. They were after something specific, maybe the buried box, the energy signatures, or even the subterranean system no one could fully map. Using the terrain to his advantage, he approached under cover of boulders and twisted juniper trees. He tossed a small drone into the air, a silent hover model rigged with night vision and a flash disorientation light. The device buzzed upward, out of sight, waiting. Duane circled around and positioned himself above the camp, on a ledge that overlooked the entire setup. He could see it all now. Cracked crates of geological sensors, a laptop linked to solar panels, and bags that probably held more than just gear, maybe illegally excavated relics, or worse, samples from deep within the mine that never should have left the ground. He gave the signal. The drone dipped low and triggered its strobe, baiting the camp in a disorienting pulse of white light. Chaos erupted. Shouts rang out. One of the intruders stumbled backward, knocking over a crate. Another reached for the rifle. But before anyone could aim, Duane dropped from the ledge and hit the ground like a thunderclap. He moved fast, boots kicking up red dust as he charged the nearest tent. A boot to the generator sent it crashing, cutting power to their electronics. The second intruder raised the rifle, but Duane hit him with a clean shoulder block, knocking the weapon free and sending the man sprawling. The third, the one with the Kumskia, tried to run. Duane wasn't about to let him vanish into the canyon. He launched a beanbag round that struck square in the back, crumpling the runner to the dirt. In seconds, it was over. The poachers groaned on the ground, disoriented and bruised but alive. Duane tied their hands with paracord and radioed back to the base camp for pickup. He took a moment to breathe. The adrenaline still surged, but his focus remained razor sharp. As he searched the camp, the implications grew heavier. Not just mining tools, sampling kits, radiation meters, a cracked map with zones marked in red, some lining up with the anomalies in the vault, others over the buried river that had changed course decades ago. These people hadn't come to steal gold. They'd come for something much older and potentially more dangerous. Whatever they were hunting, it had ties to the strange happenings underground, and it meant the ranch was more exposed than anyone had realized. Duane burned the poachers' maps and destroyed their tech. The USB drives were pocketed for analysis, but everything else was trashed. This wasn't going to be a warning shot. It was going to be a line in the sand. By the time the sun rose again, Duane stood back at the ranch's edge, watching the horizon. The intruders were gone, handed over to local authorities under suspicion of environmental crimes and trespassing on protected land. But he knew it wouldn't end there. There would be more. People were drawn to Blind Frog Ranch like moths to flame, driven by greed, mystery, or madness. He walked to the vault entrance, where the cold wind whispered up from the mine shaft like the breath of the earth itself. Whatever lay below, it was calling more than just legends. It was attracting scientists, soldiers of fortune, and clandestine operators. The ranch wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was ground zero for something much bigger. Duane tightened the vault's lock and turned back to the rising sun. The fight wasn't over, but he'd made one thing clear. Duane Ollinger stood atop the observation ridge, arms folded across his chest, gazed sharp. The land below whispered to him, not in words, but through signs, patterns in the dust, unnatural tracks, and the subtle disturbance of stillness that only a seasoned rancher could detect. Something, or someone, had invaded Blind Frog Ranch again. But this time, it wasn't energy anomalies or spectral shadows from beneath the earth. This time, it was men. Over the past week, movement had been detected beyond the western ridge, deep in the restricted zone near the collapsed mine shafts. Night vision trail cameras caught glimpses, shapes slipping through the dark, a glint of metal, flickers of infrared heat. Then came the fire pit discovered at sunrise, still warm with fresh embers. A shredded map, half buried in dust, marked with coordinates suspiciously close to the cavern system. All signs pointed to one conclusion: poachers, but not just hunters. These were trespassers with equipment, sophisticated and deliberate. Prospectors, looters, possibly more. Duane knew the ranch's legends attracted all kinds: gold, ancient artifacts, lost Spanish treasure, and the magnetic anomalies that scrambled compasses and made drones drop from the sky. He'd seen truth buried under the weight of myth, and he knew some would risk anything to claim it. He wasn't going to let that happen. At dawn, Duane loaded the gear. Tactical drones, motion sensors, non-lethal munitions, flares, water packs. The ATV kicked up a veil of dust behind him as he descended into the rough terrain, headed westward into the Badlands. The brush thickened, the trails narrowed, and the scent of sage mixed with the metallic tang of danger. Every ridge, every overhang could conceal eyes watching him, and he acted accordingly, zigzagging his route, killing the engine at intervals, listening to the land. As he reached the outer boundary of the ranch, he saw it. Faint smoke trailing into the sky, too thin for a tourist camp, too remote for any authorized team. He parked the ATV under camouflage netting and approached on foot, sliding through the brush like a desert predator. The heat bore down mercilessly, but his breath stayed steady, boots silent against the sand and shale. The camp was nestled in a rocky alcove, shielded by sheer cliffs. Tops hung between dead trees. Equipment cases lay scattered across the ground, half covered with dust. A makeshift antenna jutted skyward, linked to a laptop powered by portable solar panels. 3 figures moved about. One watching the perimeter with binoculars, one working on a seismic sensor array, and the third sitting near the fire pit, examining what looked like core samples. They were well equipped, dressed in tactical desert gear, and operated like a team. These weren't ordinary poachers. They were trained, coordinated, possibly mercenaries, possibly worse. Duane waited until nightfall. The desert chilled, the wind picking up, stirring ash and whispers. Under the moonless sky, he released a reconnaissance drone, silent and black as a raven. It hovered above the camp, transmitting thermal images and terrain layout. The 3 intruders had set up motion traps and infrared alarms, but the perimeter had blind spots, exactly the kind Duane needed.